Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, June 9th, 2026 study session of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen excused and Council Members Gilman and Madrone excused tonight. So we only have one business item on our agenda, and that is the 2027 budget update. And we have our City Manager, Jay Burney, and our Finance Director, Mike Githens, to present tonight. And I believe we're going to take questions throughout the presentation, correct? All right. Thank you. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. Again, for the record, Jay Burney, City Manager. And as the mayor indicated, I'm joined by Finance Director Mike Githens, and then behind him is part of the finance team in Joan Lutz, and then several of the council members are here, or excuse me, department directors are here either in person or online just to kind of help us along the way as questions may come up. As we begin discussions around the 2027 budget, I want to take a minute because I think it's important to talk about where we've been over the past 3 years. 3 years ago, we were looking at what then was a projected $10 million budget gap. And through some new revenues and hard conversations around those around reductions, we fully closed that $10 million gap last year. I just want to continue to express a lot of gratitude for this council, for the department directors, for our employees, for all the work that's been done over the last few years to close a significant budget gap. But as I also have continued to share over the past 3 to 4 years, our work to sustain our budget is never finished. We are looking at the year ahead. We are looking at a year ahead with potentially rising inflation. We're seeing it already. Concerns over whether or not a recession is on the horizon in some form or another. And just this week, a rough outlook around the state budget. So although you're going to hear a good update on sales tax from Mike tonight, there is still a lot of the year left. And with the 1% cap on property tax that continues to be in place, it remains difficult for expenses to keep pace with revenues. That is all my way of saying as we kind of kick off budget conversations this evening and move through the year, that we got to remain diligent and conservative in our approach to budgeting. I also want to point out that I moved a few slides around over the weekend as I prepared for tonight. So what you see tonight in terms of the order of the slides might be a little bit different than what we emailed you on Friday. So in terms of tonight's discussion, we're going to start with the Finance Director. He's going to walk you through how we ended 2025 in terms of how we closed out the year and how that impacted our total fund balance. As part of that discussion, I will provide an update around the cost to transition all city services and programs off the Lee Creighton Justice Center site as we prepare to turn the property over to the Squaxin Island Tribe for redevelopment. We will then take a look at the budget work ahead before Mike outlines the assumptions and revenue outlook as we look forward to 2027. I will then review some changes that we've made to the budget process in terms of how I work with the departments to assemble the budget, and we will get into enhancements and or critical needs as we look forward into 2027. And then finally, I want to take some time tonight to check in with all of you around considerations or areas of interest that might be on your minds as we move forward into 2027 budget preparation and deliberations. With that, I'm going to turn it to Mike to get started.
All right, thank you, Jay. For the record, Mike Githens, Finance Director. I'm going to start tonight with the 2025 preliminary year-end estimate. And so we have it as preliminary, mostly because it's still in the phase of the audit. And so until that is finalized, we can't call it a final year-end balance. I don't look for any big changes with this, but let's just talk about where we project that we'll end 2025. So when we take a look at the chart that we have in front of you, you have the 2025 beginning fund balance, the revenues that we're listing as preliminary, and our expenditures that are preliminary. Those are really the areas where we could in audit have them say perhaps this belongs in a different fund, something going on with that we might need to change. I don't hear anything right now. We had an entrance conference, in fact, this afternoon, and things are looking good and moving well, but we need to call it preliminary until they issue their opinion. So our ending fund balance was $14.6 million. Of that, the 2026 10% reserve is $12.1 million. So that's 10% of our budgeted general fund regular obligations, to remind you where that calculation comes from. So we had an amount above that 10% of $2,490,398. We've outlined here at the bottom the obligations and impacts to that amount above. So that was our carryover and budget amendment requests. And just to remind you, those are items that were budgeted in 2025 that departments had in progress. They could have been some purchase orders. They were projects that were in process that we took to the city manager, discussed with him before we brought it to you all in the first quarter budget amendment. And then, which Jay is going to talk about more, the Plum Street proceeds spend plan, that amount is in there. So when you subtract that, it leaves us with just over $1 million. There are some unknowns out there that we have that we're watching. I think the place that I'm pleased for 2026 is that we balance, to remind you, the 2026 budget without a reliance on end fund balance in our regular operations for the general fund. That's a huge positive that we were able to do that and not have to rely on this. So right now, as of this moment on June 9th, we're looking at that $1 million figure, but knowing that there are some things hanging out there, that's where the end fund balance is. We share this with you because that really is something we use to begin the budget process as we talk about revenues and expenses for 2027. So I know, just to explain maybe a bit to the public that might be watching this, we're talking about 2025 year end when we're really in 2026, but it impacts that budget, which is why I shared and highlighted that we didn't use that end fund balance to balance 2026, and then as it leads into the development of the 2027 budget and forecast models.
Councilmember Green, followed by Councilmember Barrett.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. So just over $1 million fund balance above the reserve doesn't sound like a lot to me, sort of historically, and I get, like, let's ignore COVID years because financially those are all a mess, but like over the last 10 years-ish, like about how does that rate? Like, are we normally around there?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back in time, in my time here, as assistant city manager and city manager. For a lot of years, when we balanced the budget, we balanced it to the 10% reserve. So when we brought a budget to the council, it was always balanced to the 10% reserve, and we didn't really talk about a fund balance outside of that. And then when we closed out year end, we would come forward and say, hey, we closed out the year end, we have an extra $1 million, or we have an extra $2 million, or whatever the number would be. And council members would then say, and we'd have a conversation about, are there one-time costs, and we'd allocate those dollars off to somewhere else. We didn't always keep them in fund balance. About 5 years ago, roughly 6 years ago, the time I became city manager, we kind of talked about changing the policy, and I cautioned against kind of finding ways to spend extra money, right? Because we had money left over at year end. It shouldn't necessarily mean we should find something for it. Doesn't mean the past councils didn't find other important things, because we did. We paid for fire trucks with those proceeds. We paid for other things that we needed, but it would be better to then hold on to them and then work them through our budget process. So as we're balancing and we're preparing for the next year's budget, we're talking about what those needs are and then trying to balance them within the budget. It's my way of saying we haven't always carried a balance above the 10%, but over the last 6 or 7 years we have. I will say, to your question, it has dwindled. It used to be as high as $6 million. And year over year, as again, expenditures continue to outpace revenues, we get to year end and we close out a year and it's starting to erode. The other thing I will say, the reason what you're required to have, as you know, is the 10%. And the reason it's important to try to carry a balance above that 10% is for reasons exactly like this. Things happen and things come up. I'd much rather us be into a reserve of our fund balance that doesn't get into our 10% than be in a situation where we're into our 10%. So We're down to $1 million, and it would be good for us to try our hardest to try to grow that fund balance again over time. Does that help?
Councilmember Barrett.
Thank you. And this is a very basic question, but on the sale of the Plum Street property that we had, 9.8 million or whatever the number was, I'm assuming that is incorporated into the 2025 revenues of 114 million, or is that treated as a separate item?
It's in a different fund, so it wouldn't be part of that.
So it's not a part of the
Amount?
operating budget fund?
Because we're just talking about the general fund with this year-end estimate.
Great.
And I'm going to dig into Justice Center next couple slides.
So I'll just conclude with this slide on the year-end estimate. That 10% reserve, that's the lowest amount it can be, just to remind you. That really serves as our cash balance, if you will, to get us through those times where one of our major revenue sources, property taxes, only comes in twice a year. So it really serves an important purpose in our city's finances. So we, of course, I think I can speak for Jay because we've talked about this. We'd love it to be a couple % higher. That's difficult to do. And as the city manager just stated, we'd love also to have that unreserved amount be higher. I think, again, I want to emphasize that we balance the 2026 budget without a reliance on this, and that's a very good thing. I think you'll see that there are cities in our state that are not doing that, and that can cause structural problems further down the road. So that's where our fund balance is. I'm going to turn it over to Jay to talk about the Lee Creighton Justice Center proceeds.
Thank you, Mike. I wanted to speak to this because when I talked about this in the Finance Committee, they suggested that we might take a deeper dive as this comes to council in terms of kind of where we are and what created that deficit of $589,000. So as the council is aware, we've been working on a transition of programs and services from the Lee Creighton Justice Center over the past 18 months. And we've updated the council along the way in a variety of ways around our progress. Going back to the beginning, the work is complicated as we negotiated our first ever interlocal agreement with the county for court services, including addressing our space needs for that move. Moving the programs and services has also taken considerable planning. In particular, I want to thank the Public Works, Parks, Homeless Response teams for all their work and coordination of this. And I also want to give a special shout out to our former city engineer, Fran Eide, who came out of retirement for about 18 months to help us sort through all this and help us put a plan together around those proceeds. As we shared from the beginning with the council, most of the resources from the sale of the property would likely be utilized to account for the transition. And we had hoped early in the process to break even or maybe come out a little bit ahead in terms of those proceeds. We got pretty close. I'm going to go through this, kind of the details in a minute here. But we are needing an additional $589,000 out of fund balance to get everything across the finish line. Most of that, as you will see from the attachment in your staff report and the slides that I'm going to share, is some additional security and parking positions needed by the county that we hadn't accounted for in the early contract negotiations. We are covering that cost as a one-time figure in year one, but those costs will be wrapped and shared by all the jurisdictions when we get into the rate study that's to come. Outside of that, staff did a great job of staying fairly close to initial estimates. I want to point out that the $589,000 overage is less than 10% of the budget that was allocated to this project. So it, just in my public works days, being under 10% as a contingency in terms of where we are is pretty good and pretty close math. These slides are a bit different than what you saw previously because they've got a little more detail in them. So I'm going to kind of start at the top and kind of work our way down. Both with the sale of the property, we had some, and then we also had some capital facilities dollars that we added to it that were previously programmed for the Justice Center site that we applied here. So we had about $8.9 million worth of funding to kind of account for everything that is being moved off the site. Project management, that's paying for staff time, that's Fran's time, that's Public Works employees' times that they charge against the project. That's that time. We hired a consultant to help us do all the planning work and all the various design concepts. As council remembers, we've gone through a lot of iterations to get here to this point of kind of how we move. At first, we looked at lease space across the street, and we did considerable design work to see if that would work. As it turns out, it would not. And then we've gone through a few design iterations to get us to the point where we are now, where we have everything kind of laid out. And so we've had a consultant helping us do that. We separated 14 employees in total from our organization. We negotiated settlement agreements with the unions for all those employees. I'll point out that many of those employees were long-term employees. And so we did what we could to make sure we helped everyone transition out of the organization as best we could. And then we get into kind of some of the details. The parking acquisition, striping, and signage. So we had to do two things. At the old site, there is secured parking for the police department. When we built this building, part of the contractual obligation that we have to the police guild in particular is to provide secured parking. When we built this building, we built it with the staff that we had at the time. As you know, we've hired additional officers with public safety sales tax. We've grown the police force. We've also added alternative programs. And when you add all that up, we didn't have enough parking here on site at City Hall, so we provided additional secured parking over at the Justice Center site. We've got to replace that parking. We also have some parking requirements for vehicles that and people that work here. Council later this year is going to take up commercial parking requirements, but for now they're still in place, and that applies to our buildings as well. So we have to account for parking spaces that were available over there for employees that are no longer available. So to do that, we acquired some properties through this process. We acquired what used to be the used car lot right across the street, and the old Capitol Plumbing building that's right next to it, and then the large parking lot that's right across the street from it, we acquired for about $2 million in total. The large parking lot that's across the street is going to be fenced, and it's going to be secured parking to meet the requirements that we need for OPD and their secured parking. And then the building that we bought and the smaller parking lot, the other thing that's over at the Justice Center site is all of our evidence storage. Both inside and outside, we have evidence storage. And if you've been over there, and some of you have, some of you haven't, there are large storage containers that exist over there for evidence storage. And so all that's transitioning over to the warehouse that's across the street. It has to be secured, and some renovations to that building that are happening. And that parking lot will be fenced for, again, evidence storage. So the largest part of replacing our parking was the acquisition of property, around $2 million. The rest of it, you'll see the fencing, the striping, some of the other improvements add to that piece of the puzzle. But acquisition, as you'll see there, are and the improvements to that storage, what's going to be evidence storage to fortify that building to make sure it's secure for evidence storage is a big cost as well. And then program relocation, we relocated Plum Street Village. All the residents that were there at Plum Street Village were all accounted for. We housed them in other parts of the system. So nobody lost their housing through this. Several of the units were moved over to Franz Anderson. 19 of the units were moved over to Franz Anderson. Some of the units were provided to Olympia, and some of the units were provided to Union Gospel Mission. So the good news is we made good use of those units throughout the system in other places. And then everyone that was in that tiny home village was also moved somewhere else. We also had some shared resources on that site. So Lot had donated, some of you that have been over to Plum Street knew we had a shared shower, laundry facility. We had two of those. One's going to Quinn Street, one went to Franz Anderson. So the good news is all of the resources that were at Plum Street have been relocated somewhere else at a cost of about $350,000. The Japanese Garden, we set aside $350,000 as a starting place. That is going to get us through design. It's going to get us through, staff are salvaging all of the important things that are at the Japanese Garden and moving them to other locations to hold on to them for now, so that we can reuse them in a future park. We will have to come back at some point in time after the Parks Department gets through a design process and a community engagement, and we scope out what's the size, what's this look like, where's it gonna go, it's likely it's gonna exceed that $350,000 number. But we'll come back and we'll talk with council about funding alternatives once that number is more clearly known, with staff in terms of size and scope. And it's hard to guess at this point in time what that number is gonna be until they get a little further along. And then moving staffing. We had to, of the staffing that was there, as again, some employees separated, we're holding on to our prosecution, we're moving them over here to City Hall, to the second floor, and that has to be secured space. So they have to kind of be walled off from the rest of the employees with their own entry exit, because you can't have access to prosecution staff by other employees and community groups. And then I mentioned OPD evidence storage. And then there's some technology costs. We have to do some records transition and some fiber relocation to account for our move to the county. And then again, Thurston County, we have some tenant improvements. And then we hadn't anticipated in the first contract with the county, they hadn't anticipated that we needed some additional security and some positions to address our parking. So we had to amend our agreement to add those positions. And when you really look, as I mentioned before, that's the bulk of the 589 that we're over right now, is that unanticipated cost with the county. That, again, that's one time. That will be shared by other jurisdictions moving forward. So that's where we are. That's kind of an accounting of the costs. I'm gonna pause right here and see what questions anyone has in terms of where we are with transition to those assets.
Any questions?
Councilmember
Barrett.
You addressed this somewhat, but if we could dive a little deeper, one thing that would be is interesting. It's the closure of the Japanese garden, and kind of the domino effects of everything that fall into that, because it does drive a whole bunch of policies in my estimation. And having been given this honor by the council to be the Metropolitan Parks chair, I feel ownership in the parks issues in particular. But I am kind of fearful. I'm concerned about the costs that are going to be encumbered for the redevelopment of the Japanese garden. There's more questions, I guess, than answers at this time, and I don't hold anyone accountable to that. But I don't think the $350,000 comes close to what the costs affiliated with that movement, however it manifests itself. I kind of want to. There's a secondary issue, if I could go into that, and that is the Japanese garden. It's very important to me that it not leapfrog above projects that are in the pipeline that serve the greater community. For instance, the Lily Road Park. I totally supported this, and I think we did a good thing. But when we moved up the timeline on Rebecca Howard, we bumped back the timeline on Lily Road, and it's an undeveloped park in a park desert that is. We have wonderful parks in Olympia, but this part of town is really lacking. It's near the hospital at St. Peter's, this property. I think we could have put a Serenity Park there that could be a Japanese park, as a piece of that. But that's not the direction we're going in this process, I guess. So I don't know that will be an option. So just kind of two things, and you touched upon this. I am concerned that these costs related to the redevelopment of a new Japanese garden are going to be foisted on to the Parks Department, and they're not accounted for in the budget. And so, if it's 1 million, 2 million, whatever it's going to be, this is one real concern that we didn't really hold money back for that, from what I can see. The second issue is I do want to make sure that, particularly in the case of the Lily Road Park, that park is not put back any further, because it was put back a year when we decided to accelerate the Rebecca Howard Park, and I want to make sure that it isn't moved back another year, because that is a parks desert in that part of town that needs some help. Thank you for the report. That was very helpful to me, and I appreciate, you know, how responsive you've been on the inquiries that I've made. But I don't know, these are my concerns, and I just wanted to lay them out because they are specifically the things I'm concerned about.
I appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, one of the things that we try to take into account, I try to take into account, is we allocated 350 because allocating more then comes out of fund balance. And I asked Sylvan and the Parks team, what do you need to get us to a place where you'll have more certainty about what it might cost for a future park? The answer was probably about 350 to get us through a design phase. Then that allows me to come back to the council later with Parks and say, okay, we've gotten through a design, a concept, here's what we think it's gonna cost, and then we can talk about how you might wanna pay for that. You might use Parks proceeds, you might wanna go back to use some use of fund balance. Those will choice points that will be in front of the council later. I just didn't wanna make them for you here and leave them open for a future conversation with you and allocate what we knew was needed now, and then come back and we can have a conversation about both source of funding, prioritization of projects in the mix, and potential impacts. At the end of the day, that's a policy choice that this council will get to wrestle with and make in terms of, do you want this park, this Japanese garden, to leapfrog or be prioritized over something else, or do you not? And what's the timing by which we build it? Can we phase it? There's probably a variety of solutions that we can come up with here. And I'll talk through that with Sylvan and her team as we move forward to make sure you get a variety of options as this comes back to you.
Councilmember Green.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Payne. I actually just wanted to, Jay, I don't know if it's for you or Fran or who, but just share a compliment that, you know, when we saw one of the earlier slides at Finance Committee a couple months ago, I was a little taken aback when I saw some of the Plum Street numbers, and I didn't remember, I didn't quite remember the early numbers we saw. And so when we got this, I went back and I looked at some of the early numbers, and I'm really surprised at how close it eventually came out. So it's just, I just want to, compliment on those early estimates, because some of, the employee settlements were not in there at all. So certainly there were pieces that ended up much less than estimates, and then these pieces. So I just wanted to share that after I was a little taken aback the first time I saw those numbers, I was pretty impressed when I went back and looked again. So.
Well, thank you. In fairness to you, when I came to Finance Committee, I said the number could be as high as $1 million, right? And we've worked all the way up to the last minute here to confirm all the numbers, and Mark's team's done a great job, particularly over the last couple of weeks, to just reconfirm everything and make sure all the numbers are where we are. And I appreciate the compliment, but all those compliments go to Fran and Mark and that team and the Parks team and our homeless response team. In particular, for Kim Conrad and her team, the care that they took to make use of all of those units within the system and find everyone at Plum Street a place to go within an 18-month window seemed like an impossible task when we tasked her with it, and she made it happen. And so she made it happen with support from Public Works and their team too. But there's a lot of shout outs here and a lot of great work done by a lot of employees to offer care and to do the work. And I also, for Manny and his team, to work through the unions and to work with the employees on settlement agreements. That is difficult work. And they did it with care and with a lot of forward thinking to try to make sure we did the best job we could to take care of people. So there's a lot of thanks to go around. So I wanted to go there, but I appreciate you.
Yeah, that's a great point. You also warned us that there might be some additional one-time costs. I remember that, and we're seeing them now. So, yeah, good foresight. Councilmember Barrett, thank you for, sharing your perspective and your concern. I do think that we have to sort of let the design phase of the Japanese garden play out. Let's see, in terms of site selection, what they come up with and where are they proposing and all of that. And I think maybe that will help us with our decision a little bit more. So I don't know what that timeline looks like, and if it matches up perfectly with when we need to be making these decisions, that would be helpful to know. But I do think that I think it would be a benefit to us to see that first, if we could, before we had to make any decision one way or the other. But I will say that these are projects that we've made commitments to the community. So I just want to acknowledge that as we go into our deliberations over the next few months. Yes, Councilmember Vanderpool.
I would also like to get an update on, I guess, Parks project timeline. Additionally, in the back of my mind is also Parsival, which needs to be redesigned for sea rise and adaptation, and just seeing where we are with that too, and other various, I guess, further down the timeline properties that were supposed to be parks.
Yeah, and as we move forward into this year's budget and this year's capital facilities planning, that will all come in front of council. And I'll make sure that Silvana and her team weave this into that conversation so you can kind of see an early conversation around that. But again, I anticipate they're going to be in design and community engagement going into next year, and we're a bit out from where we will actually move forward with any kind of construction. So we've got some time here. And I've definitely heard quite clearly here tonight around making sure that those conversations and decisions around prioritization of projects and funding come back here first, and they absolutely will.
Great. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to kick it back to Mike for the next few slides.
All right, thank you. Wanted to spend just a moment on the budget calendar. One of the things we heard from council was your appreciation for having the budget before you early, sooner. And so we're here tonight with this study session to continue that. The calendar is carefully developed. In fact, the finance team led by Joan, we really start planning this in January. And sometimes I think people think, why are we just barely got a budget adopted? But in order to get this all laid out to meet the approval dates that we need to have with council in December, the property tax levy in November, all that has to be very carefully planned out. So what we've changed it a little bit to make sure that it meets the needs that you have and also the timelines. I think it's a very strong plan for us. Jay's going to talk about some of the changes we've made that I think are really solid, and that's involving the executive team in different processes. That's shown on here. As you can see, I highlighted in yellow where we're at tonight with tonight's study session. We've been at work on this budget process for several weeks. We had the official kickoff with everyone last Monday on the budget process. By that I mean all city departments, so that they had their directions for getting things entered. We started this capital facilities plan in May. So this process is well thought out. It's solid. You'll notice we have another touch point with you in August, late August, it's at not a study session, but we've changed it to a business meeting. We'll be before you to just update you on our revenue outlooks, where we're at, and then moving through those timelines where we really need to go, I got you. To then the adoption. It seems early right now, but we move really quickly here with what we need to do once departments get requests in, once we get the forecasts in, to then get it before you, get the rates and fees before finance committee and you. So all this is planned out. But again, I want to emphasize, we're really working to make sure that you see this often and early so that there are no surprises and we're keeping you well updated. So that's our calendar.
I'm going to add one more thing since Mike mentioned the budget kickoff that we had with department directors and staff and all the budget teams for their departments. The message for me was hold the line. We're in a hold the line budget. I expect this to be another really difficult year. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of some of the departmental needs later on, but none of those will be in the baseline. So I ask everyone to keep anything that's extra or added or critical out of the baseline. Hold the line. That's the budget I want to see presented, and then we'll make adjustments from there. So I want to make sure you had that knowledge as well. That's the direction I provided.
All right, I'm going to move on to the assumptions we're making as we're developing the baseline budget. So we're looking at hearing from our partners in pooled insurance that we can expect around a 21% medical insurance premium bump. We're budgeting for that. I, like you sitting here, hope that it's much less than that, but as we build this initial budget, we need to plan for that scenario so that as we're getting you those initial figures, as the city manager is preparing his initial budget, we've planned for that worst case scenario. All of that is still up in the air. We'll get more firm numbers in July, but that's where we're at. We landed on the 21% figure. We tend to go pretty conservative on these estimates for that reason. Labor and Industries and our workers' comp, as you may well be, or you are aware, we switched from a self-funded model to using the state Labor and Industries. Since we're new to this, we'll have an expected rate increase. We've budgeted the maximum on that to make sure that, again, we're accounting for that in our base budget. We hope it'll be less, but we won't know that until later into the budget process. Salary adjustments. So those are largely tied to the consumer price index for the Seattle region. We looked at what April was. We'll have a next read on this in mid-July for June, and that's the one our labor agreements largely are keyed off of, is that June reading. At April, it was 4.9%. I fully expect that it will be in that range as we get the June reading. As you know, in your own life, prices aren't going down, they seem to be going up, and so that's likely to drive that there. So as we plan this budget, I think the message you've heard from other public agencies, near and far in our state, our costs are far exceeding what our revenue increases. Our costs are increasing much greater than our revenue increases. It's that structural imbalance in what we have. But we're doing our best here to plan with assumptions that are on the conservative side. So as we're building the budget, we hope to bring those down. Right now, I can't tell you that that's going to happen. We'll just have to get more figures in as we move along. But that's, in my recommendation, the safe place to be, taking these assumptions at that level. So I'll pause there. That's really, again, we'll have more updates as July's kind of that big month where we get some updates. We'll get the CPI, and we should hear from our pooled insurance provider through Association Washington Cities what that rate settles at.
Councilmember Green.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Are there assumptions that you're carrying down into department directors? So for example, when you say hold the line, keep your baseline, like I know there are things in my own organization that at the department level are sometimes jumping more than people expect. So for example, software expenses, some different odds and ends that certainly are impacting the broader budget, even though they're not a whole organization line item. What conversations are you having around that?
Yeah, so that's a good clarifying question on what hold the line means. So hold the line on things in your control. So for example, PSE rates are going up 20%. So those will be in the baseline, right? Because the departments can't do anything about it. For them to give me an enhancement request and ask me to, or the council, whether we'll approve it or not, right? We're going to have power and they're going to cost something. If we have existing software agreements and we know we're not going to get rid of that software and the costs go up, then those incremental increases in those will be part of the baseline. So what I've really told them when I talk about hold the line, it's about things that are in their control. And that what I've also asked them is when, as part of submitting their budgets, even things that are outside their control, if they're significant, to make sure they point them out to me and to the finance team. And Joan does a really good job of tracking those things and pointing them out to the rest of us. But, you know, a 20% increase in utility rates is significant across the organization. So, you know, and I'll just comment that our labor agreements call for a 1% minimum, 5% maximum in terms of what CPI is. So 4.9, if we stay there in June, this is at the higher end of those labor agreements. And then I've always said, so go the unions, so go the independents, right? So, you know, on the one hand, I always say, I think we all love being in a position to offer increases to our employees. We want them to keep pace with the cost of living here in Olympia. But anything at 4% or more is significant in terms of the impacts on the budget. It's a big lift across all of our employees. And then when you add a potential 21% benefit increase on top of that, it's in the millions of dollars is what we're talking about here. So this expenses and revenues and inflation being where it is a really hard spot for cities. We've been on a roller coaster with inflation over the past few years. Last year, inflation wasn't as significant. I'm kind of blown away, but not totally surprised by where we are now. But we've seen it as high as 11% in the past few years. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. But on the next slide, Mike's going to give you a little bit of good news.
Don't build it up too much here.
Yeah.
Let me just also, I wanted to give you to kind of try to quantify this. When I talk about a 21% increase on medical, that can be approximately $2.1 million, just the increased amount. When we talk about, as Jay just explained with that wage increase, that can be over $2 million. So just there, you're talking about, I've outlined $4.5 million in just those increases. And in finance, we do build in some increases where we know. So for instance, in my own department, the state audit isn't something we choose. We have to have it. Those costs are going to go up. So that's built in. So that's another example to just kind of carry that on. So on the revenue outlook, positive, yes. I shared that example of our assumptions though, because again, our expenses are increasing more. So this is our first look at the revenue. We'll do 2 more forecasts, if you will, during the budget process where we're really able to narrow this down more. So I'll give you the big picture. Right now we're looking at we're forecasting a 3.5% increase. To put that in perspective, and these are listed in order for the general fund of amount. So sales tax is our largest amount, followed by property tax, followed by business and occupation tax. So the biggest amount here, or the reason for that 3.5% growth is, as you recall, council enacted that public safety sales tax. It's going into effect on July 1st. We're only collecting part of the year this year, so a big amount of that 3.5% we're forecasting right now is due to the full year impact in 2027. However, well, let me talk a little bit more about these areas. So that's where we're seeing sales tax. For the most part, up through March, our sales tax has been pretty unimpressive, pretty flat, you know, which is fine. Revenue, just to review with you, it's so important that we're forecasting this as close as we can, because when you think about this, if we over forecast revenue, we're going to build expenses to that. And if it doesn't come in as we forecast, we're in a real structural problem there. So hitting this revenue at that right amount is of paramount importance because so much relies on this. So we take it very seriously. We have a top-notch revenue team led by accounting manager Thomas Donnelly. This isn't just kind of a finger in the wind at where do we think the economy is going. It is very data-driven. So as we look at this, sales tax is really that volatile area that we take multiple measures to read. Property tax, love it or hate it, it's pretty easy to forecast because it's a 1% increase plus the new construction. So it's pretty straightforward for us to forecast. B&O tax, as you know, also had some changes adopted by council for this year. Those are going well. I'll just give you anecdotally, we had anticipated that it might cause businesses some confusion. We were ready to, person the phones as those payments came in. It went very seamlessly. We heard very little in the way of questions. People are paying the appropriate amount. So that's going well. I feel like we did good service to our businesses when we're asking them to pay more. That we had anticipated that amount, and so that's not a large increase. But let me tell you what's happened with sales tax. So when we got the numbers for April, they were way up this year. May came in, same thing, it's way up. So we immediately started to dig into this because that's obviously something where you're saying, what's going on here? So in the 2025 legislative session, the legislature had authorized some taxes on some new areas. Some of these had never been taxed before. So these were IT services, web development, security and investigations, temporary staffing, advertising, and live presentations. And those were all taxes that were put into place effective October 1, 2025. But businesses, including us, weren't required to start taxing at that higher level because of existing contracts you might have until April 1 of 2026. So we knew about this in finance. I'll be honest, we anticipated it more, I think, on the expense side. What's this going to cost us? Because as the city, we pay that sales tax also. We didn't anticipate this large of an increase in our revenue. Now, by large, I don't mean that it's taking over those assumptions I just gave you. We also need a little more data. That's why it's not in this projection yet, because we want to make absolutely sure that these numbers are going to continue to come in. And so we want 2 more months to read this, and then we'll have a better handle on it. Now, we are able to dig into the data that we get specifically, and you see that often. I think Jay forwards you the sales tax report that is produced by Finance Monthly. We see those different components, if you will, the breakdowns of what businesses are paying, and so we can tell where this is coming from. So we're not just shooting in the dark at this. But we still, being the conservative nature of your finance department, we want a bit more data to really hang our hat, so to speak, on that this is going to be able to be counted on. So I would anticipate, let me just tell you, if you think about 3.5%, that equates to roughly 3.5 million, so remember I told you we're already budgeting just on a couple of areas in our expenses over that. So I don't anticipate that this is going to be our salvation. The other thing I need to share with you is that was passed by the 2025 legislature. In 2026, they passed something that's, I think, popularly or unpopularly known as the millionaire's tax. This all rolls back should that go into place January 1st, 2029. So it's not permanent. That's something that City Manager Bernie and I have talked about. That may likely is something on our lobbyist plate that we need to put in front of them. But that does speak positively to what we're seeing in our revenues for this year, and then for us to forecast for 2027. So as we look at the next revenue forecast, I want to share that with you, but guardedly, we need more data. We'll be able to share with you exactly what it is. It doesn't overcome the increase in our expenditures, but it's certainly positive news. It's not often that I get to tell Jay, come see me, I have something to tell you, and he comes with, I'm sure, the anticipation that, what does he want? What's he gonna tell me? But this was actually positive news. And we really looked at the data carefully. This isn't something that I'm sharing because we think it's so. We're really sure, but we want to see our June receipts come in on June 30th and then the July, and then we'll really know that this is where it's at. So that's where we're really looking at the revenue. I'm focusing on these areas of the general fund. In particular, as you know, sales tax affects multiple areas. So this is just that, the part that I was referring to as earlier as the regular operations of the general fund, but we have TBD sales tax, so this is all a positive across the sales tax spectrum. That's the revenue outlook.
And I'll just add, we'll be back in August for a follow-on study session, and Mike can provide an update to this outlook then when we'll have several months worth and kind of know if this is trending and kind of what that does for us in terms of, does that change a 3.5% projection to something different than that? Okay.
Looks like we have a question.
Oh,
No, I just want to thank you so much for this presentation. I know it's not over yet, but this is something that is very relieving to me to know these financial matters. So thank you.
you're welcome. Mike mentioned, and I mentioned that we've kind of made some changes to the budget process. So in terms of how I work to pull departments together around the budget, historically, I've formed a budget review team, and that budget review team includes me, the assistant city managers, the finance director and his team, and then I rotate a department director through. I change it up every year, and part of that is so directors on a rotating basis get more in-depth into the budget, and then over time they all become more knowledgeable how we budget and how I make decisions around the budget and how I work with the council. And we've been doing it that way for a long time, as long as I was an assistant city manager, as long as I was a city manager. So probably the better part of 20 years, that's been our process. We bring everyone together in August. There's a week in August. And over the course of that week, the departments all come and they give presentations to me and the budget review team. So I had a great discussion with the directors at our retreat in March, and they talked about how time consuming that process is, because they all have to then gear up and put a PowerPoint presentation together and bring their teams together, and we're setting aside a better part of days to go through information. And a lot of it, to be honest, is stuff I know, but it's review for them, and a lot of it is them talking about accomplishments and things that they're working on, things that they're proud of, things we've done in the last budget, which I love every bit of that. I know you do as well, to hear the positive things. But they express that it takes a lot to do that. And they also express the desire to be more connected as a group to the budget process. They really, I'll say this, I have a team already that I think works really well together and goes to bat for each other and has made sacrifices in their own departments to help other departments. And that's something we should all be proud of. But they want to be more involved in the process as a way to help you and help me and bring different solutions to the table, which I appreciate. So I'm going to work the budget discussions a different way this year. I'm going to work it through the broader set of department directors. I'm going to continue to have a smaller budget review team. So as we get into the finer points and I start meeting with council and I have to start making some decisions around how we bend and flex the budget, it's hard to do that with a large group. But we started that work already. As we talk about enhancements, I'll get to that in a minute. We don't usually start that discussion until August. And we've already started it. I'm going to give you a sneak peek at it already. And they're going to help me then continue to narrow that. And I'm going to keep them more engaged in this process. And we're not going to do all these department by department presentations in August. And we are still going to have a meeting in August to go through rates and fees and all of that, because that needs its time. And that's the way it comes to the finance committee, it comes to the council. So I'm going to keep that meeting in August in place, because I need to know how all the work we're doing affects utility rates and all those things, and it's hard to do that in a larger group. But we're going to do the other meetings in a smaller group. And then to get at the departments really finding value and bringing their teams to talk to me and the larger executive team about the work that they do, we're going to weave that in throughout the year. So every month I'm going to have a different department come and bring their teams and talk about the things that they're proud of and the work that they're doing and successes they have. And I'm going to work for a way to feed that to different council presentations along the way as we get into follow-on years. So again, how the council experiences the budget isn't gonna change a lot. It's more on my end of things. And just wanna express a lot of appreciation to the department directors for them kind of bringing this up at a retreat and saying, we wanna be more helpful, we wanna be more engaged in this process, we wanna bring more voices to the table to help solve problems. So, just appreciate that. So I wanted to highlight that. The executive team also had a presentation just like this last week. They saw the year-end closeout. They got the 2027 budget outlook and assumptions last week so that they could provide any feedback to me and to Mike in advance of this meeting. So we incorporated that. Again, they got an earlier look than they normally do about where we are. It normally happens in August. One additional change I made is to include all the directors in the quarterly budget updates. So quarterly, myself, the assistant city managers meet with the finance team, and they go through where we are on all of our key indicators: sales tax, B&O, property tax. As you know, I'll just continue to say this, we have a new tool up on our finance page where you at home can do the same tracking. But I used to take that meeting with a small group, and then I would make decisions out of that based on kind of where we are. Like, for example, if we're falling behind, I would make decisions about whether we're gonna implement spending freezes or hiring freezes based on that. I'm now bringing those quarterly budget presentations to the entire executive team. So we're all in the same room, hearing the same information, and they're helping me make decisions about kind of where we are. And then when I'm making decisions about hiring freezes or cutting costs or wherever we may be, they're part of it from the ground up, not waiting to hear from me about where we are. So again, I see all of this as really positive. I see all of it as a way to better connect the department directors with me, with you, and the work we do through the budget. And I'm going to continue to say I'm really grateful they spoke up at the retreat when I asked them what's something we could do better and something we can improve. This is something that came out of that, and I implemented it right away. Any questions on that? Okay. Budget enhancements. So we've been talking about enhancements. As I mentioned, we started this process earlier than normal. And tonight I'm going to give the council an early look with a lot more work to come to narrow this list and won't be, again, I said, another tough budget year. An enhancement is a term that we use to describe a department's request during the budget process for the coming year to add something to their baseline budget. It could be because of a new state or federal mandate. It could be because of costs that are outside of their control that are significant they want to make sure I'm aware of. It could be to address what they see as a service level deficiency where we're falling behind on offering a core service. Or it could be something that they need to respond to a council or community initiative, as an example. Prior to this year, again, I'll keep saying this, I used to get these in August, and then I would quickly work through them with a budget review team to move forward the items that I thought needed to move forward for council consideration. By engaging the E-team earlier in these discussions, we're gonna work as a team to narrow that. So by the time I get to August, rather than starting in August to narrow, I hope to get to August with a narrowed list so that when we come back in August with a follow-on study session to the council, my goal is to bring you, hey, we've narrowed this down and here are the things, council, that we really think we need to try to figure out how we're gonna fund in the budget. Doesn't mean we're gonna be able to afford them all, but these are the ones that we wanna narrow down to. This will save a lot of work effort because as prior to this year, they all filled out, we have a form that they fill out to ask for an enhancement, and they would fill it out for every single one of them and submit them all. So now we're gonna narrow down before that happens, and so once we get to the narrowed list, I'll ask them to fill those forms out with more detail. So instead of filling out 30 forms, we're gonna fill out 5 to 10 forms. So we're gonna save process here as well and save capacity of staff. Okay. So as I mentioned, we are just at the beginning of our discussion around enhancements. Over the past 3 weeks, I've worked with the directors to assemble that list. Tonight, I just want to share with you what's on the initial list. Again, I believe this is a tough year to add anything that's unfunded to the general fund, but I do think it's important for the council and the community to see kind of the full list of critical needs expressed by the departments in terms of what they're expressing to me and to you is critical for them and their departments, and how those needs will impact future budgets. Even if we can't afford to fund a majority of them this year, it's important that I see them and you see them because they're going to stay on that list. And we're going to have to look, at some point in time, they are going to become more critical than they are, even if we have to phase them in over time. So I work with the E-team to put their list. You have a full list of the what I call non-revenue supported enhancements in your staff report, broken down by focus area. We broke them down further for tonight into really 3 categories. Those categories aren't in a priority order, they're just numbered by category. Category 1 are items that are either mandated, that we have to do, they're critical to operations, or the other one I asked them for is some significant impact due to the reductions that we've made that we didn't anticipate. The other category is something that's needed to advance a community or council priority or advances the work in one of our significant planning efforts, that being climate, reimagining public safety, the One Community Plan, or Olympia Strong. And then the other category, we've done a little narrowing already to say, what are those items that we can kind of take off the list right now that we can consider in future planning or can be deferred at this moment in time? So the good news is, as of tonight, we've done the first batch of narrowing into category 1, 2, and 3. So category 1, and I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll certainly answer any questions you have on any one, if there's one on the list you want to know more about, but I'll just hit a few highlights here on some of these. The additional FTE in prosecuting attorney's office. You just had a study session with the county and our prosecuting attorneys and our defense attorneys to talk about our transition to courts. And one of the things you heard from the prosecuting attorney is, in order for us to really start to move into alternatives, to building up our community court, is they need more capacity in the prosecuting attorney's office. Just like public defenders, as their case counts are up, the case counts are up for prosecution as well. And I'm hearing a lot of concern expressed by our city's prosecutor that she needs more resources so that she can dedicate more time to advancing community court and those alternatives at a faster pace than she can now. So I've added that to the list here, and actually I added it because I knew the legal team was going to add it to the list. So that's one. Indigent defense standards, are up. We have to address those. We in the Public Works Department eliminated a signs and signals operations supervisor, and the thought process was that we were going to weave that work into transportation group and have one supervisor oversee both. She's overwhelmed by that work, and we've tried really hard in lots of different ways to try to structure that differently, and there's no amount of money I can throw at that supervisor to make it feel better for the workload that she's had to take on. And so I'm recognizing that right now as a pretty significant impact. We've also added a new sidewalk team to that and more employees to that supervisor's list of responsibilities. And so I need to course correct, and I need the council's help to course correct with that. So again, I've got more work to figure out how I'm going to fund some of these things, but it's just one I've identified up front that is a significant impact to the workload that we hadn't anticipated when we decided to make that reduction. And then the human resources FTEs, you had a presentation during your retreat around how our internal services compare to other jurisdictions of our size in terms of the number of employees we have and the number of departments we have. We're falling behind, and the place where we're really falling behind is in human resources. We have more labor contracts than we've ever had. Our employee counts are up with new police officers and new programs that we've added through ballot measures and other things, and we haven't kept pace. And they are busting at the seams in terms of workload in the human resources department. So whether or not we can get to 2 or we can get to 1 or we can get to any this year, it's a critical need for that department. The work-life harmony right now, it's more work and less harmony happening in our human resources department. And I just want to acknowledge that. And then homeless response, to manage the cleanups, and our home fund dollars are stretched. The dollars of the state have been reduced. We're doing everything we can to keep pace, and we're scraping to find money here or there to do one-off cleanups where they come up.
Jay?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention the anticipated election cost will also be in this category. So Auditor Hall is anticipating as much as a 50% increase to elections, which we'll be on the hook for.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned that to me, and that'll make its way on this list as we continue moving forward, but. Any questions on the category 1 list before I transition to kind of category 2 items?
Councilmember Vanderpool.
So I'm hearing you, especially around when you said sign signals. I was like, oh yeah, we talked about this a little bit. And particularly if we end up doing more programming going forward around traffic safety concerns.
Yep.
That will probably add more to that workload, I would assume.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Well noted. And then the prosecuting attorney, so the court programming, I'm curious because it's our prosecuting attorney. It's not a joint cost is my question, because I realize that we as a city have I won't say higher priorities, but different priorities than other cities that are contracted in the county. So this isn't something that we could split costs in the future.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Keep moving. So category 2 items, we have a CARES position that's formally grant funded, and in talking to the chief, we're seeing a lot of great success with our CARES program right now, and it'll be hard to let this position go because the grant money goes away. So we would very much like to find a way to hold on to that position within the CARES program. So that's why that one's on the list. We have a climate resilience coordinator that's grant funded right now, and over time, as those grant funds go away, our climate work doesn't diminish. And so again, Dr. Braff has brought this forward. We got at some of that position last year with some budget adjustments, but we haven't fully funded that position. And so it's on the list because it's critical to advancing our climate work. And then one of the things that council asked myself and Dr. Braff to work on this year is more funding for some of the building decarb work and some of the share accelerator programs and some of the other programs that are operating out of the climate program that we've historically had grant money for, like things like Energize. Energize costs us about $200,000 a year to implement, and it's mostly grant funded. And when that grant funding goes away, we still have a wait list for those programs. And so she and I are going to work. I don't know what the number is right now, but council did ask us to work on more secure funding for some of those programs. So they're not so grant dependent. So we're going to work on that a little bit. I don't know what the number looks like right now, but we'd like to try to make headway to some extent on some of that work. So that's what that is. Plum Street corridor, I think you all know why that's there. It's on the land use work plan. It's on the council work plan. And then the other one that's here is, and Councilmember Vanderpool, you mentioned the work that's happening right now within both the community livability and land use around street safety and cameras and transportation work. And we're hearing a lot of the work around, can we revive a traffic calming program? And can we do some other things to get it speeding? And can we implement some projects on a faster pace? And even if we had the money, we don't have the staffing to advance the design and move projects up faster in the queue than we have them. And even without some of those conversations, that's still true. To keep Capitol Way on track and keep Mottman on track and keep some of these other projects on track, Mark's team in Public Works, specifically in engineers, are falling behind in our ability to keep pace with that work. So again, this is something we're gonna have a lot more conversation about, but I wanted you to know it's on that list for a couple of reasons. One is, we've had a lot of conversation with council about pace of transportation projects, and we've got new funding, and we wanna move, as we move into sidewalk conversations, some of those sidewalk projects, even though we have a team for them, have to be designed because they have tree impacts or stormwater impacts. And that team can only move as fast as the design work that keeps them pace in doing that work. So we're stretched thin there, and I want to have more conversation with the council about some positions there. And that'll kind of manifest itself through these other conversations that are going to make their way to you throughout the year. So by the time we get into the budget process, this will become more clear about where the need is. Any question on category 2 stuff, anything that's there? Okay, category 3. I want to point out things in category 3 are things that we're just saying right now they're going to be hard to fund. And as I talk to directors, we can work to defer some of these for now. It doesn't make them less important. It doesn't mean that the need is not there in the departments. It's just us trying to have an honest initial conversation with ourselves about where we think we can get to with limited resources and things that we can try to defer till a future time. I'll point out that we have 2 fire trucks on order. We have 1 more that we need to order. There's a 4-year wait time on fire engines. So even if I ordered one today, it's 4 years from now before we get it. It's the same with the 2 that we have on order. And we cannot run engines to failure. We cannot. And we cannot ask the fire department to nurse along response vehicles, especially fire apparatus that respond to fires. So we're more than likely going to have to make a decision to go ahead and put one on order, and then over the next 4 years, I'm going to be working with the council to set aside the money that we need to fund it. So when I say it can be deferred, that's an example of one we don't need to come up with the money right now, but we're going to have to address it at some point in time over the next 4 years. And then everything else on this list, I think, kind of speaks for itself in terms of things that people are needing. But right now, we're kind of saying we'll defer for now. Is there anything on that list that you say, how dare you put that on the deferred list? We think it needs to be now.
Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a different question, but thanks for that setup.
Yeah.
No, this is not a how dare you. It's just a clarifying question for me. When we look at things like park rangers or park public service representative, what is the funding relationship with those and like the dedicated parks budget? I mean, does that not become part of the parks budget, or does that still come out of general operating?
Yeah, so there is an 11% dedication, as you know, of the general fund budget that goes to parks, and then there's the OMPD dollars, the Municipal Park District dollars. But those are it's a finite amount of money, and the Parks Department has to work within that finite amount of money. And just like the rest of the general fund, their costs for positions, their levels of service increase every year, and they have to try to keep pace. And so this is an early signal from Parks that there's some positions that they think they need, but they don't think they'll fit even within the dedicated revenue they have associated with Parks right now. And so they're just highlighting it. As we move through the budget process, Silvana may very well say, hey, I'm going to prioritize this over that, and we may come before you as the budget process moves forward. And within her operating dollars, she may say, hey, I really think I need this park ranger, so I'm going to do less of this. But those conversations will come before you before any of those decisions get made. It really doesn't affect the capital budget so much as it affects the operating budget. So that's why those are there. Does that help?
It does help, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Jay?
Yep.
Will we be able to go back and look at the previous year's budgets and when we made decisions and the reductions that were there? Because when I look at these, I'm wondering, okay, what were on all of those reduction lists, and can we just have a clearer understanding so when we're making decisions, we're able to compare it to previous budgets, and I think that would be helpful so we understand, which departments were really affected, in the previous years and things like that. Yeah.
That's a great point. We'll bring that in August. When we come back in August, we'll pair that up with this list so you can see that too. That brings us to just a question I have for you. So, we've had an opportunity as department directors with my team to talk about areas of interest and critical needs in terms of just an initial thought process around that. I did want to provide an opportunity early in the budget process to ask kind of a similar question to all of you. Now, I'm not necessarily looking for a laundry list of things because I think it's a tough budget year, but I want to make sure if there's something on your mind that you didn't see on that enhancement list, or something on your mind that you're thinking is going to come up in the next year, and that you want to make sure that I pay attention to it. It could also be, it doesn't have to necessarily be a request for the budget. It could also be just like Mayor, like you talked about, wanting to see more information as we bring forward. As we come back in August, is there more information that we didn't provide tonight that you want us to provide more of, or where do you have questions? So I want to take a moment tonight just to gather your thoughts, your questions, your requests, and then we'll weave all this into future conversations with you. So I'll turn it over to all of you for your questions, and then we're going to gather them all tonight And then we'll bring back responses and kind of as we move through it.
I did have a question that was unrelated to what you've just requested. I'm sorry.
Hit me with it.
You had sent out a list of department enhancement discussion items for critical need, previously.
Yeah.
And I've seen many of those items. There were bolded items on that list, and then there were unbolded items. And I assume that the unbolded items didn't make any of the lists?
The bolded items on the list were items that had no revenue offset or a partial revenue offset. The ones that were not bolded had a revenue offset for them. So I didn't include them here because we have a way to pay for them, either through utility rates or some other way. Now, even those ones that are paid for by utility rates, the caution I'll give you is I haven't yet seen the utility rates and you haven't either. So they're contingent upon where the utility rates fall in. So they've expressed need, like for example, for some stormwater resources. Once they'll add those into the budget rate conversation, and then we'll be able to decide whether or not we think the rate's okay or the rate's too high. And if we're all worried about the rate impacts, then we could come back later and potentially say no to those items. So in that longer list, I just differentiated the ones that had some revenue and ones that did not, and the bolded ones, which is the majority of them, have no way to pay for themselves.
Great.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
I appreciate what I'm seeing, particularly items that are thinking about where we're going potentially and making sure that we're not adding more to an existing issue. I think that as we look at it, also looking at what roles did we let go of the last few years, not just what we did in the budgeting, but what particular departments saw losses, not in just rehiring, but in just really reshuffling process, because Public Works is part of that. I'm very aware of and the consequences of that. I also wonder about if we're going to be looking down the route of things like the traffic calming program, how much of that traffic calming funding that's going to be used for enhancements and equipment and cameras and stuff, how much of that would be advisable used for FTEs and how much of it is for equipment? Because you're talking about the general budget, but I also think about the other funding, right? And I get a little nervous about doing that, but I'm just curious about how much of it is earmarked for what, as just kind of a general question. That's it.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands right now. Can we get estimates for the non-revenue enhancements? So, because I just look at a list and I'm like, how much does all of this cost? Yeah.
Good point, Mayor. And I was hesitant to put any cost to anything right now for a couple of reasons. One is we haven't fully vetted them all yet. But certainly as we get further along, we'll bring numbers for all of these. So once we start to narrow and then once we'll all add the non-revenue ones back into a future list for you to look at with those costs. I just wanted to get a little further along and not put any sticker shock out there in the world about how much things cost before we know a little bit more detail. So I appreciate the question. And as this moves forward, we'll bring those with more detail.
Yes, Councilmember Vanderpool.
I have an additional thought. So as we're looking into the next few years in our work plans, how much of that will be affected by not doing some of these? For example, Transportation Master Plan is coming next year, and it'll take probably a couple of years to go through it, but not having the engineers, not having that extra support in Public Works and in transportation will probably have an effect on workflow and projects. Similar with Plum Street, right? So I'm very, in not in Public Works, but in community planning. And so I'll be curious about the downstream effects on council work and comprehensive planning work.
Yeah, I think that the Public Works team can kind of put some time into that and energy into that. It really comes down to just timing, right? It's about how quickly and how nimble you can be to implement projects that are in a CFP or policy choices made by the council. They're resource constrained, right? So on the front end, the more resource we have in transportation, the faster we can move things. So I think that will make sense to all of you. So, but, and again, to your point, we've looked ahead and we know some of those conversations are happening. And I asked Mark initially to say, hey, if we were doing more of this work and if we wanted to do this, what would that look like? And that's the 2 FTs that you see there. But we can bring more in detail about that.
All right, additional questions? Councilman
I didn't have any additional question, but Jay, you put a question to us about our priorities, and I don't know, I don't want to get ahead of our skis, Mayor, but are we ready to kind of start to talk about that? Being new to this process, I'm not confident in putting forth, requests and whatnot, but I do think that there are, first let me say, I think it's really smart to have a hold the line philosophy. The governor's OFM director, different government, they sent out a letter that I meant to forward to all of my colleagues that warned essentially the legislature that this is going to be a tough budget cycle coming up. And I assume that if the state is going to experience this, we're going to experience it to some degree. So when I look at what our priorities should be, I personally think of kind of the nuts and bolts of the city, frankly. I am very concerned about public safety, both police and fire and EMS. I believe that we have got to keep our shoulder into homeless response, and so, the homeless response teams there were items called out in that. I believe that the public continues to really want just basic services of sidewalks and roads that are well maintained. I was thrilled by the earlier presentations that we had about where the city's moving on sidewalks. We just have to keep that momentum going. There's a trust level with the public that needs to be maintained on that we're addressing these issues. I always describe it as yin and yang. We have to do kind of these basic services and take care of homeless purposes, but we also have to kind of have our city higher spiritual plane in our parks. I just strongly believe that our parks are an amenity for everyone. It's egalitarian, which I believe in, and so it's very easy to view parks as a luxury or something, that takes a lower priority. But these are my thinking. Now, of course, I've covered a lot of ground there. That doesn't narrow things down much, Jay, and I'm sorry to be so broad. But public safety, nuts and bolts transportation, homeless response, and parks are the things that I just think have to be our highest callings.
I'll just add that is helpful. As I talked, we're going to have to do some work to narrow, and knowing where all of your priorities are, we'll continue to talk about those priorities as we move through the process. They're likely going to be different for all of you, but I guarantee there's some common ground in there and amongst the things that you're all thinking about.
Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Barron, I appreciate you bringing up the OFM letter, because that, I was reading that as well, and certainly that impacts a lot of our work. And what I heard tonight is, and I understand it's very early, but very early estimates, doesn't seem like there's probably going to be enhancement money to work with. So for me, when I look at the list, that all seems really important, particularly in light of some of our priorities in that. For me, I always, or I guess I sort of naturally default to like, what are we required to do as a city, right? Like there's the stuff we want, I get that. But to me, if there's not the money to add or do that, the places where we 100% have to keep our roads drivable and have the fire department respond and OP, like, so for me, that's where I always default to, but I recognize that's not always the smartest place or the most favorite place or whatever that is. And then my other just thought in that, and I'm sure this is a discussion that you and your team have fairly often, is obviously some of these ads, are there ever opportunities to restructure or consider other efficiencies that would create the opportunity to create a needed position where there's a position that's maybe not as overwhelmed or as, maybe does services that are not as, you know what I'm saying there. So that would just be, it was the other thing bouncing around in my head is, I'd be curious what those conversations are that you all are having of other places that just the demand is shifting and could maybe create an opportunity to get in one of the enhancements.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things that I talk to directors about when they submit enhancements are, if we couldn't fund it with the general fund, do you have other ideas, right, for how we might fund it? And that's where some of those conversations start. Well, I suppose I could do this, and here's an impact to that. I could eliminate this position and do this instead, and here's the trade-offs that we get from that. And we have those conversations along the way. My guess is we'll have those conversations along the way again with directors. I appreciate the creativity they bring. The other thing that happens is the finance team, as Joan and Mike and that team looks through these, sometimes they'll come up with ideas or things. They'll say, hey, 5 years ago we paid for that this way. Is that an idea we could do again? And so they remind me and others of us sometimes that we found other ways to pay for things. So we'll certainly look at all those, and we're wide open to your ideas and feedback as we move through here too. Is if there's something on the list that you guys are more curious about, we can talk more in my one-on-ones. We can talk more in future study sessions about. We're all wide open to any creative idea that exists out there for how we might do some things. I agree with you. It's going to be really hard to add much of anything other than what we're probably required to do. And then there's probably going to be some tough choice points about some other things on the list about when we do them. And some of those may affect your work plans in terms of how quickly we can do something or not do something. So I'll have more of those as we go along. But I appreciate that comment, and because that certainly will be the work we're going to have to do here.
Additional questions, Councilmember?
So, I kind of mentioned the things that, and Jay, the things that I'm the most important to me, right? But I will emphasize street safety. As we as a city become more multimodal, it's inexcusable to continue to have incidents where people are being killed by automobiles. It just happens at a fairly high rate for our population. And so that's something that I see as almost as critical as repaving streets, because when you repave a street, you also have the opportunity to do improvements to a street, so to make it safer. I also am thinking a lot right now about our situation with our housing and on our HC and where we are with our funding, and I think that it is important right now to continue to have those services around housing and homelessness and response, because as it's predicted, if some of the social safety nets, federal ones, fall out in October, we're going to have a lot more people in a bad place, and I'm really nervous about that happening and then it falling on us. And so I think we need to continue down the route of providing as much service as we can around that. It's one of the things that we're all very nervous right now, like just in general, as if anyone else watching can tell. But the downstream effects of what's going on. But I really want to make sure that we continue to meet the needs of the community that demands us to do things, because our community will will understand if we can't do certain things, but to a certain point, they'll just keep asking us to do it. And if we go through a downturn, they'll continue to ask us to do it because those are the needs that they put in our comprehensive plan. Those are the things that they ask us as elected officials when we run for office to have. And so I think that we may find ourselves in a place where it'll be really hard because of sales tax declining, but I do think that certain things on that list, as we refine it, come back to us. But those are the things I'm thinking of top of my mind right now.
Thank you, and I'll just give you an anecdote to your point. So I spent some time this morning over at the food pantry, over at the food bank. So I spent some time with their entire team, touring the facility, walking through their needs, kind of what they're experiencing, where the need is. 30%, they're up 30% in terms of who's coming to the door week, month over month, and that number's growing. So they are seeing more people fall into the margins and fall into the need to seek alternative food, that whether they be encumbered by their housing costs or what it is. So 30% is the number I heard this morning that they're up in terms of usage. So we're already starting to see some impacts here locally of kind of SNAP benefits being reduced and other sources of food for people in our community that they're losing them.
Yeah, I think it's been said, but for me, essential services is priority number one. And Councilmember Green, I think I agree with you. It is the smartest way to approach the budget, in my opinion. I will put a little asterisk next to that. That includes economic development, because I understand that there are some disagreements about whether or not cities need to be in that business. But for me, I think economic vitality, is the basis for which that's the foundation of all of this. It's what holds up the budget. So I really do think that making sure that people can have access to food and their essential needs, and making sure that the city is doing its part to provide essential services is number one. The community-wide survey is also something that I think we should probably all sit with as we're thinking about, as we're looking at the budget and what we have in front of us, and what the community says are priorities. Obviously addressing homelessness, housing, economic development, or cost of living as part of that, economic vitality or downtown vitality, are a few things that are priorities, and I think that those are things that I'll certainly be keeping in mind. The other things that are coming to mind are things like things that have been waiting in the wings for some time now. So like the relocation of the library, right? And whenever we can make that happen, what's the expense there? And what's the timeline? Because we already know that some of these things are long overdue, but how longer can we afford to keep pushing them out? And so taking that into account, also at least looking at the most, at least the last two budgets, I think is important for this year. And I think any sort of, I would love to see expenditures or estimates for what's legislatively mandated or required, and see those figures separate from what we would like to do or love to do, because I also think that will help us also.
We can do some of that work. And some of it's reflected on the list that you saw in front of you. We can point some of that out a little more directly.
Additional comments? Councilmember Vanderpool.
I think, as the mayor's mentioned, economic vitality, especially if you're in a downturn, right? You want to make sure that your businesses are still operating. I think that the other side of that, there's a huge amount of folks in our community that are working, that will continue to be working in a downturn, who they're living paycheck to paycheck. We're in an affordability crisis. Like even with tenant protections, it could look really bad really fast, right? We can totally see more working people becoming homeless. And so as a city, we're very limited, yes, but I want us to really emphasize that the local economy, wholesome people that are working and our small businesses are staying afloat as much as we can try. I don't know what that looks like as an FT. We have an economic director, but we don't have a person that deals in the world of the affordability crisis per se. But that seems like part of that.
Well, to that point, one of the things that's been vacant for a bit as we've kind of done some restructuring CPD is a housing director. And part of that work is not just the boots on the ground homeless response, but advancing our affordable housing, our housing policy work too. And we've got great staff in Jacinda and Krista and Anna that are already do some of that work. But to really advance that work at a state level, and then to kind of continue to advance our affordable housing needs, we need some more policy work. And so help is on the way there. And I think that's going to help us tremendously in kind of sorting through kind of how we continue to make sure that the community outside of Thurston County and the developers outside of Thurston County know about the development incentives and the things we have to offer here, and drawing those developers to Thurston County, to Olympia. The number I heard this morning was 500 million units statewide of affordable housing that's needed. I think that's the number Senator Bateman said this morning at Lansdale.
1 million.
1 million. So 500,000.
Yes.
Yeah, 500,000 units. Thank you. Yeah, 500 million is a lot. 500,000 units statewide. Yeah. So
1 million. She mentioned 1 million.
And then 500,000 affordable.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes. Half the number was affordable. Yeah.
I guess the response to that, I'm thinking about the supply and demand side of it, right? I'm thinking of the livable wages and people like already, a lot of folks that already they're in apartments with like 2 or 3 roommates. If the economy collapses, it's like, where else are you going to come up with money, right? I get really concerned about people moving away and not having places to be. And that is a part that the city has not traditionally had a role in. And I think that that's something that we have to eventually have a role in. The other side of it with housing, with the supply side of it, is in a downturn, in an economic downturn, the private housing market, the developers, builders, they stop building housing, right? We fall behind like we did last time. And so I think that asking the state to take on more of a responsibility, to be a builder, to be a developer, to help us out, to do what Seattle's trying to do at a larger scale to get us there, it has to happen, because we're undersupplied now. It'll become more undersupplied in a downturn.
All right. Any additional questions or comments? All right.
I appreciate the early conversation. As I said, we'll be back early and often. We'll pick up, you mentioned the community survey, Mayor. We're going to dig into that in your mid-year retreat. And I agree that certainly will kind of show you where the community prioritizes work. And I think that is part of this larger conversation you're going to have around budget as we continue to figure out how and what we fund and how creative we can get to fund the things the community wants to see us spend more time on. So we'll spend some time in July, and then we'll be back in August. We'll bring some refinement to some of the input we heard here. And again, just appreciate the early input. And I want to just appreciate Mike. I think this is the earliest in my time we've ever given a forecast in terms of what we're thinking about. So just want to thank Mike and Joan and that team for their early work on this, and more to follow. So thank you for your input tonight.
All right. Yeah. And thank you. I mean, it's, just a couple years ago, we said that we wanted an improved process, and here we are, improved. And I think in part that's also to you, Mike, and your team. I am really impressed with, just seeing some of the projections that have been made. I think Councilmember Green spoke to that earlier around, what it was like, to look at the figures from the court decision. I think that the last couple of years is a moment where the city is going to be studied of what we did in this time in the future. I really do think there's been some really innovative approaches to it. I appreciate you pulling the curtain back on how you intend to work with staff. I think that is that gives us a little bit of context and understanding of how you all are collaborating before you come to us. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate the conservative approach as well, because clearly we can look at these lists and it's very daunting. But there's a little bit of light that's there. So thanks, Mike, for bringing that to us today. And looking forward to what you have to share in August. All right, thank you. All right, so with no further business before the Olympia City Council, we're adjourned.